Okay. Hello, people. Welcome to the Natural Awakening podcast with special guest who is normally the host, Winston Bryant-Scott. Winston, would you like to? We're going to get into your story, who you are and all those things. And so I'm not even going to ask for a short summary, but maybe you would like to tell a little bit about why are we switching the roles this time, and why am I interviewing you as opposed to, normally you have the interviewer hat. How did
Um,
this come about?
that's a good question. I mean, just causally speaking, you suggested it a little more than a year ago, I think, and it
Hmm.
was coinciding with me just about to hop into a year of residency at Zen Mountain Monastery. And I was like, yeah, we could, slip it in right now, but I'm a bit busy. Why don't we talk again after residency? And it might be a more interesting conversation then anyway. Um, and yeah, I thought, I don't know. Maybe people are curious. Maybe listeners will let me know. Maybe people are curious. Who is this guy? Why? What's going on here?
Yes, 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 yes. Totally. And I think it's actually quite serendipitous that we did wait a year because there's been recent unfoldings and transformations in your sort of neck of the consciousness. And it'd be really cool to, yeah, talk with you. I'm curious what you have to say about where you've landed, where you're going. And I think, yeah, you're just a very interesting person who does have a lot to contribute in this space. Normally, you're interviewing very interesting people, sort of, researchers and hardcore meditators and independent academics, but also people in academia as well. But the people want to hear, people want to know about you, so it's time.
All right. All right.
Starting off, maybe my first question to you, taking things in a chronological order, starting with your childhood, looking back, would you say there were any kind of spiritual, emergent, phenomenal experiences that maybe at the time you didn't recognize as being something out of the ordinary, or getting at something quite special, but now, decades later, you can reflect back and think, oh, something happened there.
Yeah, I suppose there weren't many, although there were some kind of stereotypical, flashy, mystical type experiences with, lights or entities. There were some dream stuff like that,
Mm,
but predominantly it was just. And looking back, I don't know. I don't have the basis for comparison here. It was certainly different to my later life, but a very consistent, morning to night sensory clarity and vividness, and just kind of fascination and absorption, like throughout the majority of my childhood. Like I
ah,
could just stare at something and be captivated by the way the light refracted or glinted off of objects, or just a real fascination and wonder with the world, and just being kind of saturated in that all the time. And these are memories that are arising now, right? So who knows how reliable they are? But I was a very happy child, as far as I can recall, um, and very just fascinated and interested in things, people, ideas. When I got around to being able to read and talk to people coherently,
yes.
but never losing that kind of sensory immersion. And I couldn't say what There's this developmental arc of a self in early childhood. At some point within that, some sense of separation begins or maybe splits off. But there, as I can recall, like the self boundary was not so ever present or preoccupying a lot of my time. More just sensory immersion. And at the time, I had no idea there was anything out of the ordinary going on. Um, and mm, yeah.
Wow. And can you track a period in which, yeah, the sensory clarity, so like it became more foggy or something like this? With it going into teenage years, life becomes messier and more complicated, and
Oh yeah, goodness, yeah.
what?
So things were kind of like, this would be overstating it, but I remember kind of having a problem-free childhood, basically. Like incidental things, but never dipping into like persistent low mood, basically. throughout my whole childhood, as I can recall. Although there was a period in infancy when I did have night terrors for a while. Though apparently during waking hours I was fine, but for a while I had horrible night terrors. Unable to be woken up, just screaming and thrashing through the night. So I have no idea what was going on then. I don't remember it at all. But yeah. So around age 11, I think, and my chronology here is going to be a little fuzzy. Around age 11, coinciding with a couple of things, moving into middle school, taking on more, like the social dynamics in school becoming more complicated, but also my parents at that time separating, which was kind of a shock to the system, as it can be for a lot of kids. It was like the ground kind of fell out beneath me. Although it might be more accurate to say the ground suddenly solidified.
Yeah. That's the problem. Yeah.
And then it was a pretty precipitous drop into severe anxiety, depression, and suicidality for 7 years. So that was awful, to put it mildly.
Yeah. You've mentioned this in the past, and well, then that's maybe something good to get into. Is like, your motivation for getting into meditative practice and sort of the seeking. Can you remember a time in which maybe seeking started, or you got on the path?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose throughout that whole time of really severe, diagnosed and medicated depression, among other things, there was this seeking, although it didn't take a kind of spiritual or mystical or Buddhist turn until quite late. I turned mainly, because that is what I was stuck in and looking for answers within, to like philosophy. I remember picking up, I think I was 14 at the time, I picked up Albert Camus, The Stranger, and The Myth of Sisyphus. And there were like models provided for how one could live a meaningful life in the face of inevitable death, decline, decay, and no higher ordering purpose. And I was like, well, I guess, but this isn't right. Like, there was some insight there that was missing. It was kind of the visions of what a good human life could be within that were all still versions of selfing. And I was like, that's no, that can't work. That's a doomed project.
You knew it couldn't work because you tried it to some extent and didn't find a lasting relief, or something deeper was
deeper in
speaking to you.
Yeah, they're all contingent on, they're all contingent.
And maybe that's actually the context here is worth pointing out. Where did you grow up? So, this is an English-speaking podcast, but we shouldn't take it for granted that everyone listening has come from the same culture and just knows and assumes had the same middle school experience in these things. So.
Sure. So I was born and raised on the west coast of Canada, province of British Columbia. And I was born on Vancouver Island, but for the first 6 years of life, I lived on Pender Island, which is an island in the Gulf between Vancouver Island and the mainland. And that island is only of about 2,000 people, or it was at the time when I lived there as a young child. So that was kind of an idyllic rural upbringing. I was free to wander, and I seem to remember spending a lot of time just kind of wandering outdoors through woods with friends. Memories are coming up of our neighbors had sheep that I would pet and feed grass to through the fence, that kind of thing.
Awesome. And then you left Panda Island, and where did you go?
Well, from there we lived in Boston for a year. My dad at the time was pursuing a master's in theology at Harvard, so we were there for a year. And then my dad is an Anglican priest, so there's religious background there as well. That's probably relevant. I spent, as well as a lot of time outdoors, I spent a lot of time in Anglican churches, cathedrals. I loved going to church as a child, and then kind of when the more propositional, semantic side of things started to gin up, I was like, wait a second, hold on, I see some holes here. This doesn't make so much sense. I still love the hymns. The community is nice. Everybody's really sweet. But this doesn't make any sense to me. But before that, it was like, oh, we're singing songs. We're sharing food together. There's some ritual. People wear nice clothes. There's good feeling in the air. Yeah, totally into this.
And can you take us along on the journey how you got out of that? And you said there was a 7 year stint of depression and high anxiety. How did that culminate?
Yeah. Well, it's a long and thorny story, but to keep it sort of brief, things kind of just they got better for a little bit, and then mostly they just continued to get worse. To the point where, a lot of my waking hours, were suicide was high up there, and it was more a question of when and not so much if. Never made any concerted attempts to end my life, but almost. A lot of times, almost.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I was miserable. I wasn't doing well in school. I was kind of not I was barely attending, and I was not getting out of bed a lot of days. Personal hygiene not so good. Not a good state at all. Really sunk in a deep well of misery.
How did you get out of the well?
Yeah, well, my eventually it got so bad that the circumstances had to be changed, and that kind of came in through consultation with the therapist that I was seeing at the time and my parents. And I was sent off to a kind of intensive rehabilitation program out in the wilds of Utah. The company that ran it actually doesn't exist anymore. I think they've changed names. Maybe they still have some of the same staff involved. But it was 3 months hiking in Utah. And a lot of the money that had been set aside for my university education was plowed into that. It saved my life, so no complaints here. But
Yeah, yeah, wow. So I mean, the hiking sounded like the main therapy there.
yeah, no, it was wilderness therapy. That's kind of the branch of the therapy tree that methodology is called. And yeah, it included the normal like talk therapy as part of it, and kind of group processing and journaling, and all the usual. But really, as far as I'm concerned, cutting off completely from destructive behavioral patterns and a kind of misery-making environment that I had, kind of just slid further and further into in a kind of closed behavioral loop, and then just completely being taken out of that and placed in, I could continue to be miserable, but it was much more difficult to maintain the habits that were of thought and feeling and behavior that were keeping me pegged so low, hedonically. And actually during that, I remember the first, because I went into this willingly. I was like, okay, I consented. All right, this isn't going anywhere good. All right, something radical has to shift. So, all right, I give up. And I remember the first the first night, like I was driven in, and I was because I had a history of suicidality, I was on suicide watch. So they actually because some people come in here who are actively trying to kill themselves into this program. I wasn't, but just for precaution, they wrapped me up in a tarp, and there was someone like sleeping right next to me to make sure I wasn't gonna get up and try to kill myself, because that was something that they had to deal with. And the day after that, I was really out of shape at this point. So the day after that, and I can't remember how heavy the pack was, but just walking along with this pack, I'm very out of shape. I'm out of breath. This sucks. I'm in pain. My knees hurt. The bag is heavy. It's kind of socially embarrassing that I'm lagging behind. Can't keep up. And I just collapse, and I start, just weeping and weeping and weeping. And the later on in that night, I'm like, I can't do this. This is miserable. It's not going to help. This just isn't going to work. And then I can't remember exactly how it happened, but it was like a switch flipped. It was like, it's either I do this or I'm going to be dead soon, pretty much. And then it switched. It was like, okay, no, I kind of surrendered, and all right, I'm getting better starting now, whatever that takes. All right, I give up.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and this is, I mean, it sounds, so tragic to hear, but I think a lot of people will appreciate you sharing these details because, yeah, so much of us really trundle along with so much misery that doesn't get heard, and so just relating to other people that have been through this or know that you can get out, um, and then also just skipping ahead a bit, like how would you rank your well-being levels now?
If I'm not like actively in bad pain or something, like 10 out of 10, no complaints here.
Yeah. So I mean that's just amazing. But we also don't want to forget that such suffering can occur.
Yeah.
And it's one thing to always praise the heights of potential well-being that certain individuals like you manage to get to through contemplative meditative practices. Um, all the while, don't forget where you've come from, what you've been through, and all the beings that are still uh, going through this.
Yeah. And that, I
Uh,
mean, that's a large reason why I bother recording these interviews, why I'm going in the professional direction I am, going back to school, trying to do research, because, you know, it, I can remember the memories are vivid. The kind of faint echo of how painful and miserable that state of mind protracted over years and years. That still lives. Lives in here. Um, as and I know I know people are there, and not everybody gets out. Um, Pretty much the best thing that I can imagine doing with the rest of this life is doing everything I can to make sure that other people don't have to go through what I went through, or and make it easier to get out and to be well, basically.
yeah, yeah. I think that's well, I'm not gonna toot your horn too much, but I'm with you, man.
Well, and
Um,
I know you've gone through similar things.
well, yeah, I can very much
It,
relate to you. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, where else does the kind of drive to do something like sit on your ass for however many thousands of hours to attain a higher state of well-being? Where does that drive come from? For most people, myself included, that comes from a deep place of misery. I mean,
Right.
the people I know personally, and speaking for myself, that comes from terrible suffering.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is one thing I'd like to ask you about then. Um, I'll make a note of this and we'll come back to it. But given all the training you've been through, all the people you've met, and your connections, maybe you have interesting kind of heuristics about what typically drives people, some general knowledge about how long practice typically takes to get to certain milestones and such like that. But first, keep running us along. Yeah, where did you go after this um, 3 month period in Utah? What follows?
Yeah. So after that, because I wasn't, I felt some resentment about it at the time, actually. But looking back, yeah, I wasn't ready to kind of go back and like reintegrate. I came out of that program, you know, functional basically, and not suicidally depressed. So mission success. And part of that as well was on those long hikes, getting into kind of re-engaging with that sensory immersion, and without explicit kind of mindfulness or meditation training involved, um, getting into within a unified mindfulness framework, which is the system that I'm uh, trained in and certified to teach through Shinzen's organization, getting spontaneously just through kind of absence of distraction and physical engagement, getting into states of high concentration, sensory clarity, and equanimity, and finding a peace and a contentment there that I couldn't, I had kind of forgotten that kind of pervaded my childhood. So that was big.
And then so you retouch base with something that you had before and then maybe lost connection with. And then, how did you really get into practice, formal practice? When did you discover meditation? When did you discover Buddhism?
Yeah, so I discovered kind of I had some prior interest in Buddhism. I had done some uh, reading online, and I had connected, I think, with someone came to our high school who was I think a Soto Zen priest. So I was like, there's something there. And we're all familiar with the pop culture images of someone sitting peacefully in lotus posture and um, well, usual cultural
With their hands
osmosis
like
exposure.
this. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh.
Um, hmm. So I think as a lot of people do, I remember reading one of my first like deeper dives was with Alan Watts. I remember reading a couple of his books in kind of the next stage of the therapeutic recovery process, which was in another kind of residential situation with kind of monitoring and check-in, although with a greater degree of autonomy. It's like, okay, fine, you're not actively suicidal. We trust you. You're going to have some degree of independence, and we're trying to get you back on your feet, kind of at that stage. And I remember meditating a little bit during that. I can't remember how I got connected with that, but touching into like a peace and ease, just doing like 20 minutes or something, that I was different than anything else in life at that time. Mm.
I think real quick, I think that's actually quite an interesting stage, often that where people start off of sort of seeking greater well-being overall, is with the kind of quotes. Is like, is there a thought I can think or a quote I can adopt that just makes me feel better in the moment? It sounds, mystical and magical and just right, and there's this sort of element of wisdom. And if I, just keep reading those quotes, at the right time, that reminds me of there is a kind of beauty to this world. And yeah, I guess it's easy to judge people for a kind of superficiality there of these things. It's like, yeah, but you're not actually doing a practice, you're just reading
Hey,
quotes.
whatever helps, I'm all for it.
Right, right. So exactly, yeah, just speak to that point. So easy to gloss over that, but actually that might be very relevant. Okay, so then keep walking us through. How did you develop after that?
So after that, I finished up high school, and never kind of returned to that active suicidality, but was kind of in a state of like low grade depression, functional, but kind of lost and not really. Okay, great, fine. I won't kill myself. I'll try to do something useful with my life. But what is that? And uh, blah. That would be a good expression of my state of being at that time. Just blah.
Mm.
Um, mm,
How old are you at this point?
I think I was 18. Yeah, this is like 18 to 19 at this time. I finished high school a bit late, and then was accepted to a school which, because of financial issues, is no longer in operation. But this very cool and
Was it
progressive liberal arts
Trump
and
University?
sciences.
Was it
No, thankfully not. A place called Quest University, which was in British Columbia, Canada. Um, but but the summer before heading off there to pursue, I don't know what I wanted to pursue. It was kind of a kind of build your own degree type of undergrad institution. Um, hmm. But before the summer before, I kind of checked out various alternative lifestyles. I suppose I went to a commune down in Virginia, and we'll probably circle back depending on how deep we go into the interview, because I ended up living there later for something like 2.5 years. And then on that trip, I also hopped over to Europe, and it's there that I actually visited my first monastery, Plum Village, south of France, east of Bordeaux.
Been there. Take my hands.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so that kind of warm, welcoming atmosphere. I skipped up over something major. So while coming in during that summer, I picked up. I started taking my interest in Buddhist theory and practice more seriously. Something I don't remember what triggered it exactly. But I picked up Nagarjuna, Jay Garfield's translation and commentary on the fundamental verses of the Middle Way, which is this seminal texts in the history of Buddhist philosophy that, everyone likes to reference and have different interpretations of. Entire schools of thought diverge from. Anyway, big deal. So I read that, and it's incredibly dense and kind of cryptic verse, though J. Garfield's modern philosophical vocabulary filtered through the Tibetan side of the interpretation.
And you've interviewed J. Garfield.
Yeah, that was a real pleasure and joy because of this kind of personal connection I had that was a major turning point years prior. But anyway, reading that text, getting to the end, I remember I was in such a state of concentration, like just trying to understand what the hell was going on in this book, and doing all right. And then it clicked. At a certain point, it just began clicking, where every word on the page, I'm just like, oh my god, yeah. Emptiness. Everything is empty. Whoa. Yeah. Whoa. And just getting that more and more fleshed out, chapter and verse through the rest of the book, and then kind of reading for hours at a time, and then finally the book is finished. I'm in kind of this dizzied state. Everything just kind of stops when I finish the book, in terms of like, there's no mental imagery, there's no thoughts arising. The emotions are calm, and I'm just kind of in this bewildered state. And I walk outside, I sit down on a hammock, I look up, and I see a cloud drifting by, and, kind of a classic story. Any sense of separation or of solidity just drops. It's boundless, open, not me, not me, boom, pow, wow. And that lasts maybe half a second, but, definitive, clear, no doubt about it. All sense of separate self or solidity just gone. Any bound gone. And then, maybe half a second later, things kind of twist back together. And I'm like, whoa, what the fuck was that? That was amazing. That's the, whoa. Give me some more of that. I'm in. Full steam ahead. I guess I'm a Buddhist now. That makes sense. All right, great.
Wow. Was it very much like that? Then did you start?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was like from that point forward, it was like, oh, okay, all right. I guess I know what the rest of my life is for. Whatever that was. Yep.
Wow. Who could you go speak to about that experience?
No one at that time. I had no connections. So I was just like, okay, I'll I got to pursue this seriously because nothing else I've ever experienced in my life, and I can't even imagine anything else comparing to that. So, great. Yeah.
Now, given where you are now, how would you contextualize that experience? But at the time, you said, okay, I know what the rest of my life is for now, and these things. Retroactively, what would you say? How do you make sense of that experience, and what would you say if someone just had an experience like that? Where are they at, or
I mean, it depends. People have glimpses, and those glimpses can be of various depth and duration. So mine was, I would characterize it as very deep. In fact, equivalent to this or anything prior, and yet it it lasted about as long as that.
Yeah.
And I had no practice at the time, so I had no means and no one to connect with to kind of. I had no, in a sense, this is good. I had no framework, except what I had just read, which was very conceptual, which led me to a place of non-conceptuality and emptiness, openness, all of these various words, which is the purpose of texts like that. But anyway, so that experience happened before I got to Plum Village, and that was what motivated the go to Plum Village. I was like, well, I guess I should look at different Buddhist sects, and I like Thich Nhat Hanh, and because of the focus on environmental ethics, and I liked the vibe, to put it, simply. Yeah, I don't know. And then that was wonderful. I spent 2 weeks there. Not very diligently practicing, actually. I remember sleeping in a bunch, and missing some morning meditation periods. Um, but there was this sense of like vividness and wonder, uh, throughout kind of my sensory experience while I was there, even though I wasn't, hitting the mat hard or practicing very diligently.
And your low grade depression at this point
Lifted.
from that moment.
In the wake of that experience, never came back in the same way, I would say.
It's so powerful. We talk about like, antidepressant medication. It's like give people Kensho.
Even if it's a baby one, even if it's like
Yeah,
half a
yeah.
second it doesn't last, pretty good.
Yeah. Um, and I guess, okay, this isn't my ministry. Were you talking to the monks at Plum Village about your experience? Or
I didn't bring it up for years. I didn't bring it up with anybody.
okay, this is an interesting because when I went to Plum Village, um, I didn't talk to the monks so much about some of my crazy phenomenological insights and the things I'd experienced as well. Because part of it felt like the environment. I guess that's not what they focus on there. Maybe because you've been around many masters and monks, can you speak to a lot of people don't know what is appropriate to say with monks or what you can bring up. Maybe can you talk in general about guidelines there, how to approach them and what might
I
be
can't,
appropriate to say and what?
yeah, I can't say anything general because it really varies in my experience. The truth is, and if you dig at all, you'll find this yourself. The vast majority of monks, both now and throughout Buddhist history, don't in fact meditate or don't meditate much.
Mm.
They're more focused on scriptural study, ritual performance, and kind of serving the needs of the lay community as, kind of spiritual, doing pastoral care, that kind of thing. And very few monks, either now or throughout history, have actually dedicated themselves full time to liberation. That's just not historically what has been the case, and is still true today.
Why?
I would love to know, Roger. I would love to know. There is a prevailing belief, has been, and is still present for many people, that liberation, we're kind of in the declining age of the Dharma. And liberation might have been possible like 500 years ago for 1 out of 10 million people, but for us these days, no, not so much. Just look around. Corrupt institutions, moral degradation everywhere. Liberation in this day and age? Are you kidding? Absolutely not. It's just impossible.
What? So it sounds like, yeah, maybe there's some doctrinal beliefs about life cycles or yeah, social cycles as well, and also that not in this lifetime. You're not going to get it.
The best you can do is accrue a store of merit so that maybe even in the next turnover of the cosmological cycle. So in the next universe, if you do a good job accumulating enough merit here, next time round, you'll have a chance. Or you can do certain practices in this lifetime so that you'll be reborn in more favorable conditions in a pure land. So that, swiftly and easily you can attain in some heavenly realm enlightenment under the, expert tutelage of one or another Buddha or celestial host of bodhisattvas. That's the state of the field, if you like, for many people.
And you didn't buy into that.
Well, no. Partly because with my cultural background and inherited assumptions, rebirth never, in a literal sense, never landed or made much sense. Didn't put any strong weight or stock in it. It's like, even if I did believe in the rebirth cosmology, actually, which I don't, all the more reason to liberation now. You think, and in the canonical texts, in the Pali Canon, any text you read, pretty much, there are exceptions. It's like, okay, these are backup options if you can't manage liberation in this lifetime. But really, put your all. The masters of the past, present, and hopefully future all say, no, here, now. Practice now. Realize liberation now. Now is the best time. Come on, guys.
What if, and this is something I wanted to ask you about, okay, well, what role does self-esteem play in, liberating practices and making progress. So what if I just don't believe myself. I don't think it is possible for me. What if my teachers are telling me I try to answer all the koans and they say it's wrong, and we can get more into this.
I mean, this isn't a polite answer, but it's how I feel, so I'll say it anyway. If your teacher doesn't believe in the possibility of your liberation and you are seeking liberation, you should find a different teacher. To be frank.
Okay, that's a very interesting point. And is it maybe a sign, a potential you're dealing with more of a sort of cult leader guru who's looking for
I mean, it doesn't have
admiration
to
of
be anything
followers,
sinister. It doesn't have to be anything sinister. This connects back to the bio piece. After a semester and a half at university, I dropped out thinking, okay, well, why am I wasting my time with this when I could be pursuing liberation full time? I like Plum Village. Let's go, maybe become a monastic in their tradition. And I was in Blue Cliff Monastery in upstate New York for about 6 months, and really just threw myself into practice and study. And we could talk about that more later or in detail if you want, if it seems relevant. But after a year between Blue Cliff and in Plum Village, I got to a point where I was like, I really want to be, putting all of my day and night effort into liberation in this lifetime. And the structure was not supportive of that, I suppose. And the teachers weren't, talking openly about that. And if I went to I remember one time going to kind of the monastic advisor I had been assigned as a layperson. And then also, because I got partway on the track to ordination as an anagarika. So, I had taken some vows and I was in some robes. So I was experiencing, classic signs of development and concentration, which from the reading that I had been doing, I was like, yep, hitting the markers, hitting the milestones, concentration, developing, whoop-de-doo. Very good. And developing insight into impermanence, all, good stuff. Just as it says in the books. None of which was being talked about in any of the official teaching we were receiving. So I brought some of the experiences that I was having to one of the monastic mentors, and he was like, oh yeah, sounds like your concentration is strong. I can't, and you're having experiences. I can't help you. I don't really know about that.
Oh, wow. Very interesting. And were you seeing any of your peers at that time developing this concentration as well? Do you think you were kind of naturally gifted in this area, maybe?
I honestly don't. I was sitting a lot extracurricularly, like the minimum required sitting. I was sitting at least 2 hours more every day than most of the others. And from just casual conversations or practice conversations with peers, no, they weren't, hitting, looking back now and using classical criteria, I would say I was getting pretty deep into access concentration, and developing, insight into impermanence, in Nietzsche, from the classical Buddhist lens, if, that's where we're hanging out right now. But yeah. And having significant no-self experiences, including some with duration. So.
Yeah. I think it comes back to a sort of a sentiment I just want to reverberate more and more. Is like, put in the work, do it. Like, really sit your ass on the cushion for hours and hours, done skillfully. Yeah. So then you felt like you had to go elsewhere because you weren't getting the kind of tutelage that you wanted.
Yeah, and this is a bit of regret because during the time when I was in Anagarika, they assigned another monastic mentor to the small group of us who were kind of on the track for ordination there, and he had been traditionally trained in Vietnam, and was actually, he knew his stuff. One time he said, oh, when I started, he had been ordained since he was like 13 or 14 or something. He was like, when I started, back in Vietnam, we would sit 3 hours every morning, no moving. At first, it was very, very painful, very difficult. But then, you realize you sit for a while, the pain gets to a certain level of intensity and it's horrible. But then you realize, the pain, it's not actually this constant thing. If you look, you can find gaps, and it kind of goes like this. And if you focus on the gaps, really, it's not so bad. And you do that for a while, and then you get out past the body, and then you can play with your mind. See, sometimes he would just drop things like that, and we would be like, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but he was the only one that I had personal kind of sustained contact with who was like that, I guess, and had practiced like that. And when I announced that I was leaving, I had bought my plane ticket. I was going to explore other lineages with more of a practice and liberation focus, like, right now, quickly as possible. Let's go, everybody.
What other lineages did you explore? Oh, sorry, finish the point.
Well, finish the story. He said, Wystan, I'm sorry to see you go. I wish you had come to me earlier. I would have been happy to, help you out. If you wanted to sit more, I would have gotten up and sat with you more. So massive missed opportunity on my part there.
Or a missed opportunity on his part, or
well, he was like, Wystan, you're very ambitious. I understand you want to become a Buddha in one lifetime. I wish you all the best. Just don't forget, rely on the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And then, we hugged and he said goodbye.
yeah. Oh well. Then, actually, sort of pressing you a little bit more on this point about self-esteem. So one interpretation of like you're very ambitious, you want to become a Buddha in this lifetime. That sounds just arrogant and grandiose. Maybe he didn't mean it that way, but it could be interpreted that.
It could be. At the time, he was giving me a big old grin, and he was, sad to see me go, but it was entirely sincere. He really meant it. Best wishes.
Yeah.
And looking back, I was, an arrogant, prideful, however old I was, like 20, 21, something like that. I was an arrogant young guy who was like really gunning for liberation as I saw it at the time, and was disappointed with what I saw around me. So there was arrogance there for sure.
But I think there's a subtle point there to be made about the distinction between sort of healthy self-esteem versus pride and ego. You wanted liberation. You wanted to feel better. You wanted to suffer less. Versus, I want to be enlightened and I want to be special and these things. And maybe you can't always parse those out. But eventually you see the difference, and the irony being that that part of you that wants these accolades doesn't ever get to have it. Doesn't get there. But the best of both worlds, you do get to significantly reduce your suffering. Anything more you might say on that train of self-esteem? How do we encourage people to have good self-esteem? Because I think a lot of people, they sell themselves short. They think, I can't do it, not me. The greats, they could do it, but I can't. And so I would just look for others to tell me what to do.
Yeah, I think you said it all well already, but maybe I'll see what comes out of my mouth. You, the person listening, you can do it. No doubt. You sit, you work through whatever there is to be worked through, because fundamentally there's zilch wrong with what's going on over there. You can do it.
Great.
It might take it usually takes longer than most people imagine it will when they really set their mind to do it. But it's really a decision. You have to decide, this in this body and mind with its 84,000 pores, 360 bones. That's a classical expression. This is going to do it. As long as it takes until it's done, going to do it. And after that kind of decision is made, it's not so. It doesn't mean it's easy, but it becomes a lot less complicated.
Yeah, and I think that decision is made. You touched on a moment in your story where you realize it's like I got this life. If you don't believe in rebirth and such, it's just like now or never. Like, what else am I going to do? Or I die. I'm either going to die, or I'm just going to continue to suffer miserably, or I'm going to give my best at this and try it. And maybe if I don't get it, but I can begin to reduce my suffering at least, and that's better than suffering more. So what's the alternative?
I mean, that deep but brief glimpse kind of, it kind of, in a certain sense, it fucked up the rest of my life, because I knew that nothing else, absolutely nothing else, would satisfy like that, like this does. So everything else kind of in comparison to that, just, well, I mean, why? In a sense, why bother? And that was my attitude for a while. A long time. Well,
I mean, that would speak to people have a reference to states that are more liberated than other states, and that's what will guide them. So, it's possible you just experience a kind of ego death of a kind where maybe just subject object collapses and there's no thoughts, but there's still phenomenological content and shapes and colors and all and sounds and all these things. And that's not as reduced suffering as it can get. You can have less suffering than that, but it's a new reference point, and then it's going to reorientate what the organism is sort of striving for, trying to find peace. So,
Yeah.
cool. Okay, so moving on. Maybe I really want to get to your recent transformation.
Sure, we've been
we're
talking a
skipping
while.
ahead. Many hundreds of hours of practice. But where are you at now? What happened to you? You seem like a changed person, Winston. What's going on?
Well, so most recently I was in a year of residency at a at a Zen monastery. I could give more lineage details if people want. But having kind of run the gamut of different Buddhist traditions, I've not intensively or exhaustively, but I've studied and practiced within Theravada, before, a little bit of Vajrayana, a little bit of Dzogchen, Zen as well. Most of my formal practice, I would say, and where I got the most bang for my buck, if we're gonna crudely, make proportions of what was useful, mostly the Theravadan stuff, following folks like in the pragmatic Dharma scene. The basic formula being get as concentrated as you possibly can and shred the world with insight into impermanence. That you'll go far with that. So having all of that kind of in the background and still kind of lacking resolution that I knew to be possible. I was at a point where kind of at will could flip into a non-dual state of perception where like just at baseline, the sense of inside and outside and the solidity of myself and other things, situations, objects, that was already kind of flowing, not so sticky. And at kind of the turn of intention, that could all drop, and any sense of an inside or an outside or a location to a self would just... But then I would have to get up and do things or interact within relationships, or there was still this kind of contrast where it's like this alternation that actually over time became more frustrating than less. So it was like as I was getting freer and freer of me, in the most significant sense, the contrast between free and not free got more and more. And so it was like, shit, okay, I need another intensive period of practice to get this over and done with. And it also happened to align nicely with, life circumstances. So I had the opportunity to take a kind of a year off to just do that. Yeah.
So what were you doing in that year?
You mentioned earlier the daily schedule. So the schedule at the monastery was, depending on the season, seasonally it varied a little, but an hour and a half in the morning or more, sometimes, of formal seated meditation, chanting, and like ritual. And all of that is a meditation. If you're really working it, all of that is a seamless practice. And in fact, all of your life is meant to be a seamless practice. That's kind of what the monastic practice environment is meant to be able to allow you to do. Carry that samadhi and carry that insight practice, whatever it is, throughout the whole of your day, day and night, every day. And then moving through various periods of silence and then talking throughout the day. Work practice as well. In a Zen context, you work an awful lot, mostly physical. I was actually put in charge of the kitchen for 9.5 months of my stay there. So I was responsible for making meals, depending on what was going on at the time, for between like 35 to 80 or more people. Which, that was also helpful on like a personal development level. Like I kind of had to get over my aversion to managing people and kind of being more organized and conscientious. So which is helpful, which was helpful. But also kind of made that gap. It was like, I feel so free when I can just drop activity and then I'm on a deadline. I have to manage 10 people and get them to put together a meal for everybody here. And if I screw it up, everybody's going to be upset with me, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
That kind of productive tension was good. This alternation between free and unfree.
Yes.
So I could give more details about the practice schedule if you like. And importantly, one week out of every month was devoted to full-time silent retreat, sesshin, where you're sitting upwards of 10 hours a day, in complete silence the whole time. It's like an 18-hour schedule. You wake up really early, you get, depending, like 5 to 6 hours of sleep at night, maybe less. And you're just, full steam ahead, full-time practice. Good intense practice.
Amazing. I mean, you've been put through the ringer really rigorously, it sounds like.
I mean, there are more rigorous temples and training programs.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say, oh, I'm the shit, because I'm not.
Well, for a millennial, it's a pretty rigorous.
But I was also doing koan practice, and maybe you maybe wanted to touch on this earlier. You said
I do want to ask you about koan practice, but also tell us about, was there a pivotal moment, a shift, or was, you came out of this year in a gradual way something changed, or can you point to a specific moment?
I can point to specific moments, and for those at home listening, yeah, for those at home listening, there are kind of big watershed moments, blowouts. They do occur, those, and also most of the progress happens subtly. So I don't know. I feel like I need a preamble here, and maybe I should have given it earlier. Like, if you're at all expecting these kinds of things to happen, they're less likely to.
Yeah.
And also, it's good to know that they happen, and the more you practice, the more kind of, it's, effects are dose dependent, it seems, within this domain of contemplative practice. So practice a lot, practice well, ideally with someone who knows the territory, and good things are likely to happen.
But it makes you more accident prone the more you practice.
Yeah, that's concise. Well said.
That said, caveat out the way, and not everyone should expect these things, but people love these big bang stories.
They do. They do.
So let's give the people what they want and entertain them. So tell us, how did it go down?
So, and this is actually connected to the koan practice significantly. So the right out of the gate, going in here, I knew that koan practice, which is a specifically Zen form of meditation, mostly emphasized within the Rinzai side of the current, coming out of Japan anyway, Zen scene. See, I just caveat too much, and then I forget where I'm going.
Were you doing a specific? I think you were working with
Mu, yeah.
Yeah.
The famous Mu koan. So, a lot of people are familiar with koans as kind of inexplicable riddles or puzzles that break your brain, and somehow that spontaneously results in enlightenment. In actual method, at least for the first koan, which is the only koan I worked on for the entirety of my 13 months there, which is most often the first koan given if someone undertakes koan study. In actual method, it's not so different from many other forms of meditation. And this isn't a secret. I'm not disclosing anything you couldn't find yourself, and any teacher would be happy to tell you. So each koan is laid out with a kind of literary structure. There's the main case, which is some record of a dialogue, an enlightening dialogue between often teacher and student, although it might be mythological figures or just some random set of circumstances taken from myth or fairy tale even. And then there's a commentary, and then there's a verse which kind of concludes it. But in the main case of Mu, Zhaozhou is the Chinese, so Zhaozhou's Wu in Chinese, but in Japanese it's Jōshū's Mu. So a young monastic comes up to Jōshū. So, Jōshū, does a dog have Buddha nature or not? And Jōshū replies, Mu, which is not or no, negation. And so, wait, what? That completely contradicts basic Mahayana Buddhist doctrine. All sentient beings have Buddha nature. What? So anyway, then there's a commentary which provides kind of concrete practice instructions, and then a verse which kind of sums up what is meant to occur. And this koan is meant to precipitate kind of a great Kensho experience within the structure of the curriculum.
And it did for you.
I would say so.
So, but how did it go down? So as someone I've never done koan practice, and I wanted to ask you, like, kind of like, what's the rationale behind them? Like, how are they supposed to work? And Zen has probably a wise pedagogy where they don't explain the logic behind these things, but there's many of us who are kind of, we want more specific steps spelled out. I want to know, why am I doing this?
Sure.
So yeah, can you speak a little bit to that?
Nuts and bolts. You go into an important, essential aspect of Zen training is one-on-one meeting with the teacher. So in the context of a monastery, if the person is a roshi, it'd be called dokusan, or it might be daisan, or just interview. People have different words, all essentially the same thing. You go into a private interview room, and the teacher will ask a question of you. If you're working on a koan, they'll ask you to present your understanding of the koan, and then they might just ring you out, unsatisfactory, more zazen, more sitting, come back later. Or they might have something to say or give you practical tips, up to their discretion. So nuts and bolts with Mu. And there's actually a great video by Corey Hess, who did a lot of much more intense practice than I did at a traditional Rinzai temple in Japan, who goes into the phenomenology of koan practice like excellently, to a T. So if you really want to know what's what, I would suggest you, after this video, you go check that out. But you kind of take this syllable Mu almost as a mantra. So day and night, but especially while you're sitting, you pour your whole, every ounce of samadhi that you can muster, you pour it into Mu. And especially on the out breath. Though some teachers will say, on the in breath as well as the out breath, there are minor variations in how you're meant to meditatively work with it, but you're concentrating on this syllable Mu until it kind of becomes an all-encompassing absorption into this syllable of Mu, such that the boundaries, and for me this was already going, so there was, but the boundaries between inside and outside drop. The sense of agency begins to drop. You no longer feel that it's you that is washing dishes or sitting. You feel like Mu is walking, eating, talking, shitting, etc. And then you go in periodically during sesshin. Every day you go in, and the teacher looks you dead in the eyes and says, "What is Mu? Show me Mu. Anything to say?" Something like that. And they're basically saying, "Have you attained Kensho? If so, put up or shut up or get out."
Were you in front of someone then when the shift happened, or you were?
Right. Okay. So all of that being preamble, there was a period of about a week when I think I had been there about 10 months, and the frustration had built to a degree where it was just like, fuck it, this needs to end. Not consciously. But it kind of gets into your bones, like even if you try to put down the koan, even if you're like, fuck it, I'm done with Mu, and then your body is just overtaken by Mu. Like no, it's
Still
it's
moving.
on you.
Yeah.
I don't know if this kind of thing happens with any practice. If you do it long enough and intense enough, I remember when I was doing really intense breath concentration, the first thing I would be aware of when I woke up in the morning, my attention would already be locked on, so it's like that. So there was a period of about a week when middle of the night, 1 or 2 a.m., I would wake up and just Mu. And all sense of
Mooing
agency,
at the
actually,
moon.
all sense of agency actually at this point had dropped. So it wasn't like I woke up, I thought I should really work on Mu now. No. I woke up kind of seized with Mu, and it was like, well, it was kind of a life or death thing. Like the body gets up, it walks down, and it goes down to the meditation hall because that's the only thing to do, and just sit. So at every available opportunity for about a week, sleeping maybe 2 hours a night. And this wasn't during retreat, actually. This was kind of off the retreat schedule, but every available opportunity, just moo.
Did you felt like something was coming on?
Yeah, I mean, and it wasn't under my control or my power. Any sense of me had been flushed out to a large extent.
But there was this sort of undulating sense of something is around the corner, or something's brewing.
Yeah, the samadhi, the concentration was kind of all encompassing and continuous. And using unified mindfulness terminology, like my experience was predominated by expansion, contraction, flow. Like the whole body just kind of undulating, vibrating, dissolving, things getting formless, coming back, but all the while, just like, no, this isn't done yet. This isn't resolved. It has to resolve.
For a week, you're sitting doing this for a week,
and then one night, early hours, kind of the dam breaks, and there was this simultaneous sense of space expanding to its limits and space contracting to its limits, and there may have been a cessation in there. But it's this simultaneous complete expansion and contraction, and then dropped, shattered, never came back.
What dropped, shattered? What?
Well, the sense of a localized agent or person or perceiver or doer or yada yada yada. You know what I'm talking about.
I'm gonna pretend I don't know what you're talking about. And how did you feel in the moments right after?
It was immense catharsis, emotional release. Like, 10 months, like, working at this thing and going in and, presenting some kind of meager, like, weak understanding, or, knowing I hadn't done it, to the teacher's satisfaction. Just they're like, what is Mu? And I don't have anything. It's not done yet, so I'm just... You can imagine that's kind of a frustrating pressure cooker.
Yeah. And then what happened next time you go sit in front of your teacher and they ask you, what is Mu?
Well, it's interesting because at the time, I forget if he was on vacation or if he had gone to teach, if he had gone to lead Sesshin somewhere else. The chronology is a little mixed up in my mind. But when I did get the opportunity to go in and present Mu, again, no sense of agency behind it, but like when the call goes out in the Zendo, like, okay, it's time for Dokusan, I'm like out of my seat like a shot, and traditionally you would like sprint to get in line to go see the teacher. They prefer you not do that because people can jostle or get hurt. But I was like shot out of my seat, speed walk over there, first in line, I'm down. And I push through. There's like two doors. And then the bell rings to signaling you to come in. I like shoot up out of my seat. I walk through, and there was actually one person before me. So in my kind of like urgent state, I like forgot the protocol, and I pushed open the door. And you're supposed to wait for the person inside to open the door. So I've already messed up. So I push open the door. The person like looks at me like, what? And then you're supposed to do synchronized bows. And I dropped to my knees, like, before you're supposed... Anyway, I dropped to my knees with, like, a thud. Kind of dramatic. And then, I pull myself together, do the usual thing. And it's a little fuzzy. What did he ask? Have you seen this Mu? Or what's going on? Or something like that? And I didn't take notes, so this is the best my memory can come up with. And an odd kind of thing happens in these kind of charged one-on-one encounters where even right after, sometimes my memory of what happened is not so clear.
Maybe that is telling of something about the spontaneity of the answer you gave. Means it wasn't so consciously, deliberately thought out, and therefore doesn't get so integrated into your memory stores.
Yeah, I suspect something like that is going on. But
Yeah.
the gist was, what do you see? And I like nothing seen, no one seeing, something like that. And there may have been some gestures involved. And he said, and you really think this is, you think this is done? You don't think it'll come back? And I was like, oh yeah, 100% sure. And he was like, okay, we'll see. And it was drawn out a little. But that was kind of the, yeah.
Great.
And then for the remainder of my time there, because that was, I still, there were still like ebbing fluctuations of self-consciousness coming into the interactions with teachers I had thereafter. So I did present kind of spontaneous responses and to whatever it was, but not to the best I ever got. Full disclosure, the best I ever got was, you're sort of there, sort of not, or I would give some kind of nonverbal response, and their response in turn was, "Don't give me cliches." And an interesting thing with koan practice as well is that you might make it through the main case. So they might accept your response to "What is mu? Show me mu," but then they begin with checking questions. So it's like, okay, you've shown mu. How would you show mu to a baby? How tall is mu? Show me how large mu is. And I got through some checking questions, but never from any of the teachers did I get like the full, yeah, man, you got it, good job. I got that from teachers afterwards, but verification of awakening from spiritual authority, that's a fraught topic. And as far as I'm concerned, for those listening and for myself, there's no end to practice. So wherever you are, whatever may have happened in your consciousness, to your consciousness, there's always more. So,
and could someone bluff their way through mu?
If the teacher is really on their game and knows the person, I don't think so. There are in some koan lineages, like ideal responses that have been recorded that a lot of people just tend to converge on for whatever reason. And those books have been translated and are available on the internet in English if you want. I've never looked at them. But if you want to know the answers to the ideal answers to every koan in Hakuin's koan curriculum, you can find them. But you'd be, even if you make it past mu, say the Roshi passes you on mu. Okay, great. There's hundreds of more koans. Like you can't fake it. If you do fake it successfully once, and then you're living with these people, right? So they can observe kind of your behavior, your affect. If something genuine has occurred, it's going to be noticeable. It's not just going to show up in the interview room.
Right. And there's screening for a kind of self-editing program that might be interfering with the sort of spontaneous responses, right?
Yeah, it can't be the person who responds. It has to be mu that actually shows itself, if that makes any sense.
I'm sure that doesn't make any sense to so many people. It's like, what are you on about?
What? Well, yeah.
That's part of it.
That's Zen for you.
Cool. Maybe sort of grounding this in sort of more tangible areas of life. How has life been unfolding? Can you speak to weeks, months after this?
Yeah, a
What
lot
changes?
more smoothly.
Mm.
Both just like at a raw baseline perceptual level. There's a lot less friction or coagulation.
I thought it'd be interesting to maybe talk about like the honeymoon period versus further integration. What changes? What doesn't change? Expectations. These things.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is unfortunately promised in a lot of the classical literature that if you attain some sort of perceptual baseline shift, the rest of your life will be nothing but flowers and honey and amazing bliss forever. And
That hasn't been the case for you, no?
surprisingly, no. And that hasn't been my experience. Although one of the nice things about progressive baseline shifts in kind of perceptual reification is that states of bliss, happiness, etc., do become much more accessible, much more easy to tap into. And and cultivating that, can have wonderful beneficial effects on the personality, on the sense of, that's all good. And that's that work, as far as I'm concerned, and the teachers that I've spoken to, that work never stops. Kind of the personality integration piece. Even after whatever perceptual baseline shift you want. That work never ceases. I forget what you were asking.
What about this honeymoon period? So,
oh, sure.
Would you say you're still in that phase, or
a bit, probably coming down?
Yeah. and it's worth knowing about that, and I'm sure you had maturity of perspective to know that this is a honeymoon phase. It's not going to last forever. Although there's something that does seem to last. And therefore, maybe you have you gone through a few of these?
Yeah, sure. So following even just glimpses or what seemed like baseline shifts, I've been through a lot of honeymoon phases before, and I'm in close contact with a couple of different teachers who have helped me to temper expectations. In fact, the best thing you can do is drop all expectation, as usual. So nothing lasts. Sabbe sankhara anicca. All formations are impermanent.
And maybe just to close up, like what are you up to now in life, and what are you doing personally, and what would you like to be doing, and just you're also an interesting person who's well connected in this space. What do you see happening in the greater sphere of the Dharma?
Sure, and maybe even for this to for what we've been talking about to be useful and relevant to the vast majority of people's lives, I don't think it can be limited to the frame of the Dharma. I'm happily ensconced within classical Buddhist contemplative traditions, and I will likely stay there until this body and mind go kaput. Very happy there, and also I realize that what we're talking about here isn't necessarily confined, at least to any particular religious denomination or framing.
Buddhists don't have a monopoly over worldly liberation.
No, that they do not. So I guess I would like to see this brought more out into the world, researched, studied, and I'm returning to undergraduate studies after having dropped out years ago to pursue monasticism. Never ended up ordaining, but practiced a bunch in different monasteries, as we talked about.
What are you studying?
Double majoring cognitive science and philosophy. So hopefully bringing the secular naturalistic lens to this, which, as far as I'm concerned, is completely compatible. The phenomenal self model, the phenomenal world model can be seen through at subtler and subtler layers until none of it is bought into. That would be the secular framing.
Yeah, love it. And you're teaching as well?
Yeah. I've actually stopped accepting bookings because I'm trying to enjoy a little bit of a vacation before school starts. But so they're on a limited. I'm not sure how much time I'll have for teaching, but that is available through my website. Yeah, and I'm a teacher in Shinzen's system, Shinzen Yang.
That's unified mindfulness.
Unified mindfulness, yeah, which I would heartily recommend, especially if you're more allergic to the religious form that this stuff takes.
Do say the name of your website, though, if people want to book coaching session with you, and if there is time available.
WystanTBS.com, like my name, down there at the bottom of the screen. I'm not sure if that'll show up on YouTube, but Wystan, Wystan TBS.com.
Winston, it's been really nice to hear from you and more of your story. Anything, last points, questions, anything you want to add, or statements, or...
It is possible. You can do it. And well worth the time. No regrets here. None at all.
Yeah. Super.
And it doesn't solve everything at all. Still a fucked up human being at the end of the day. That's just conditioning is what conditioning is, and that I'm going into therapy. Speaking of what I'm doing,
Good for you. Yeah, very good. Thank you, Winston.
Okay. Thanks so much, Roger, and till next time, folks. hopefully this has been helpful. I feel like I've been rambling a lot, so